What I'm going to be covering in today's training is the return to sport phase post ACL surgery. What we use is the Melbourne Return to Sport scale. And what this gives is an objective framework so we know exactly when you're ready to return to sport and what exact criteria you need to achieve in order to go back safely. We know the risk of re-injury is significant if proper ACL rehab protocols aren't followed. And the research differs, but anywhere between sort of 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 athletes will re-injure themselves if they're not following a criteria-driven return to sport criteria and have followed a time-based criteria alongside that of at least 9 months post-op. Now, the criteria we use again from the Melbourne ACL guide is this final stage assessment whereby you need to achieve 95 out of 100 or higher in order to go back. And to keep this objective, if you don't score above 95, then you're not ready to return to sport yet. And I'll talk about how this is broken down into the various different elements in just a second, but that's the most important component. The second is that you're comfortable, confident, and eager to return to sport. So you're confident in the knee, you feel confident doing the movement that caused the injury in the first place, and you're really keen to get back to sport. That's another very important criteria. And thirdly, and very importantly, is that an ACL injury prevention program has been implemented. Again, it's all well and good getting back to sport and having done a full rehab program to get you there, but you've got to continue doing this work because without that, the risk of re-injury is significant. And that looks like basically continuing with the training program, the effective training program you were doing beforehand, continuing with that on an ongoing basis to make sure you're not going to get injured again. So those are the 3 key criteria. Now, current research would suggest that at least 9 months is required post-op in order to go back. So not only do you have to meet the criteria, but you've also got to be at the 9-month mark post surgery, unless there are some specific circumstances, in which case that wouldn't apply to you. Once you've passed all 3 phases to get to this stage, you can then begin to work towards the assessments. You don't do the assessment straight away because you're probably going to be at about the 6-month mark when you move into phase 4. So there's probably a couple of months of good quality training to get you absolutely ready for the assessments. And don't be disheartened if you don't get 95 out of 100 straight away. It's quite common for an athlete to score, say, 70 or 80 out of 100 and then redo the assessments in 6 weeks and then complete the criteria. That's really the purpose of this, is to make sure you've got objective criteria to follow. Anyway, those are the 3 core criteria. The tests themselves are broken down into a few different areas. First of all, we've got the sort of stability, swelling, and range of the knee, making sure we've achieved those. Now, you will have achieved those in the very early stages, so that can be ticked off quite easily. The second component is called the IKDC Subjective Knee Evaluation Form. And alongside that, we've got another question there called the ACLRSI. So the purpose of that is basically to assess your readiness to return. And that's from a psychological or mindset perspective. Then part C is another one. And this is more about your fear of hurting the knee again. So the Tampa scale of kinesiophobia, that's essentially the worry and concerns you have around the knee and performing the movements that could potentially cause further injury. You again need to pass that assessment too, which I'll show you in just a second. Part D is the functional testing. You would have done all of these movements throughout the rehab program, but you need to make sure you hit the criteria across all of these different tests here. And then finally, you've got the general fitness testing, which is a fitness test associated with your sport. So if you're a hockey player, that's going to be something like a 16 pitch lengths test. If you're a footballer, it might be a 30-15 test. Very much depends on the sport and what you're going back to, but you need to have done a general fitness testing component. Once you've done the fitness test, you then redo the hot-based assessments in a fatigued state. And the importance of this can't really be understated, because unless you have performed these movements under fatigue, you're not going to know if the knee can withstand these sorts of impacts and loads going back into sport. So that's also really important. So once you've done all of this, you're going to get a score out of 100. And as I say, a score of 95 or above is a pass. Anything below that is unfortunately not a pass, but you can redo this every kind of 4 to 6 weeks until you get back to a position where you're ready to go back. So this is the different components of it. I've mentioned the stability, swelling, and range outcomes. You will have achieved these earlier on in the rehab process. So these are almost always quite easy to tick off because you will have achieved them relatively quickly. The ACL RSI questionnaire looks a little bit different, but this is where you get assessed on your confidence going back to sport. So just to give you a couple of examples, number one, are you confident you can perform at your previous level of sport participation? Either not at all or you're fully confident, so anywhere between 0 and 100 there. And then secondly, do you think you're likely to re-injure your knee by participating in a sport? Again, either extremely likely or not likely at all. Obviously, the higher the score, the better. This would suggest you're more confident. So someone, in your case, let's say you're giving yourself at this stage a 3 out of 10 or a 30 out of 100, you're not really confident, you think it's quite likely you might hurt your knee again, well, that's going to suggest you're not ready to return to sport yet. Even though the knee might be strong, you might not have confidence in it yet, and that's also a massive factor in re-injury risk based on the research. So you're going to complete that one. That again gives you a score, and that basically gives you a 0 or 10. So that's basically effectively a pass or fail. If you achieve 90% of the marks, you get 10. If you achieve less than 90% of the marks, you get 0. So essentially pass or fail that assessment. Now, the subjective knee evaluation form is a similar thing, but it's more looking at kind of task-specific outcomes now. So what kind of activity you're basically capable of achieving. So the highest level of activity, how often you've had pain, whether the knee has become stiff or swollen, the highest level of activity without getting any swelling in your knee, for example. Again, complete all of those different questions, and what you're going to end up with is a score again on this one, and that gives you a total score out of 87, which you then divide by, take your score divided by 87, and that's going to give you your IKDC score. In this case, this person got 51. So that's then going to give you a score to add into here to give you a total. So for example, if you were to get 45 out of 87, that'd be 51. So you'd be scoring basically like a 5.1 out of 10 in this test here. Lastly, then, the Tampa scale of kinesiophobia. Similarly, again, it's basically just assessing, are you confident in the knee? So, are you afraid you might injure yourself? If you were to try to overcome it, your pain would increase, and whether you strongly agree or disagree with those statements. Once again, this gives you a score above 18 to pass, below 18 to fail. So you just get a pass or fail for that one. Now, moving on to the functional testing, there's a few different tests here, and obviously it will be outlined in Train Heroic for you really simply with videos to explain exactly how to do the tests. But you're essentially going to have a star excursion balance test, you're going to have a vestibular balance test, a single leg hop. It's going to be a functional test of triple hop, crossover hop, side hop, and then we've got some capacity-based scores, essentially a single leg box squat, single leg rise test. We've got all of those then get calculated together to get you a total score in the functional assessment. And again, really what we're looking for is the symmetry component. So that's looking at is there a significant difference between left and right side? And if you're achieving within this kind of 3 to 5 percentage points difference, then you're going to score full marks, and then it declines going down. If you've got, say, a 40% difference, then obviously that's a 40% asymmetry, which would be extremely high, very high risk of re-injury, so you get 0 points and everything in between. Once again, that's going to give you a total score. General fitness testing, once again, you're going to put in your test for whatever that might be. Let's just say it's 16 pitch lengths run. Again, it's just a pass or fail based on normative values that we know for that sport. So if you're way off from a fitness perspective, that's going to be a risk. You probably still fail. But if you've passed that, you're just going to get a pass for the general fitness test and you can move on. And then you're going to do, obviously, the other hop-based tests, but in a fatigued state to get more scores. So ultimately what you get out of that is a total score in the functional assessment, and then that's going to give you a total score out of out of 100, and that's what you need to pass this overall test. It'll be really clearly outlined for you every single stage, but just to scoop back to the top here, just to clarify, based on all of the scores, this is what you need to get. So 95 or above on this test will allow you to ultimately do well in this test, pass, and go back to sports.